All right, UPSC aspirants, get those notebooks ready, because today we are diving deep into something you'll see all over the main syllabus and even popping up in the prelims.
Oh, yeah. This one's a big one.
It's Islam and the West,
Huge topic.
a relationship you can't sum up in a single soundbite, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
It's not just about historical facts. It's about these perceptions that are so deeply ingrained, they shape global politics.
Yeah, it really does. Like, everybody's got an opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and thankfully our source material dives right into these contrasting views.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so it's an academic text all about political Islam.
Okay.
And on one side, you've got those clash of civilizations folks, right?
Right.
Islam versus the West End of story.
Yeah, you hear that one a lot.
Oh, yeah. But then there's this other view of Islam as a victim of Western meddling. And let's be frank, Islamophobia.
Yeah, and unpacking all of that is going to be crucial for us today. Not about picking a winner or anything,
Right.
but to really grasp those historical and ideological currents at play, and especially for those aiming for top ranks.
Golly.
Understanding these nuances is what sets you apart.
It really is. Okay, let's start with Islam itself.
Yeah.
Our source stresses that it's way more than just a religion.
Yeah.
It's a complete way of life that touches everything,
It really does.
from morality to politics to economics.
Everything.
And it's all built on the Quran, the revealed word of Allah and the Sunnah.
Right, the Prophet Muhammad's teachings and practices.
Exactly. And for clarity, there are two main branches within Islam.
Yep, Sunni and Shia.
Sunnis make up the bulk of Muslims globally, but what's striking is how rapidly Islam is growing.
Oh, it's huge. It's the fastest growing religion worldwide.
Fastest in the world.
Yeah.
Our source even highlights that over half of Africa's population is projected to be Muslim very, very soon.
Wow.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
The geopolitical implications are massive.
Absolutely.
It's a demographic shift that could reshape alliances, resource competition, you name it.
Oh, yeah, all of that.
This next part is where things get really interesting, especially for our UPSC goals.
Okay.
The source gets into political Islam and Islamism.
Right.
And it's key to understand that Islamic fundamentalism isn't about taking the Quran literally.
Right. All Muslims believe in its literal truth.
Yeah, it's about placing those religious principles front and center in social and political life.
Front and center. It's a good way to put it. And that is where we make the distinction between Islam and Islamism.
Okay.
Islamism is a political ideology, a movement drawing its inspiration from Islamic principles.
Got it. So picture it like this. They're striving for this pan-Islamic unity, purifying the Muslim world from perceived corrupting influences and kicking out Western influence.
Especially from places like the Middle East.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is the stuff essay questions are made of.
It really is. And it raises the question, what happens when you establish an Islamic state grounded in Sharia law?
Ooh, yeah.
What does that mean for governance, individual rights, international relations?
Big questions.
Those are all critical points to consider, especially for the mains exam.
Okay, now let's trace the roots of militant Islamism. Our source makes it clear that this isn't some ancient, unchanging thing. It has a history.
Yeah.
It traces its modern rise back to the 1920s and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
The Muslim Brotherhood.
And then come pivotal events like the 1979 Iranian Revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini, the Soviet-Afghan War, and the rise of the Mujahideen.
And of course, the emergence of groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
Right. And these events weren't just isolated incidents. They fed into this narrative of a global fight against Western dominance and secularism.
They really did. And here's a nuance that I feel like trips a lot of people up.
Yeah.
Some see militant Islamism as inherent to Islam.
Right, that whole clash of civilizations idea.
Exactly, but others argue it's a political distortion of the faith, not about Islam itself, but about how certain groups manipulate religious ideas for power.
Yeah, and that distinction is critical for UPSC prep.
Yeah.
It's not about choosing sides, it's about understanding the different lenses through which you can analyze these events. So think about it. How does understanding the history of militant Islamism inform India's own foreign policy decisions?
That's a good question.
Especially considering our relationships with Islamic nations, our stance on terrorism, and how we approach conflicts in the region.
It's all connected.
It really is. Now let's tackle this clash of civilizations head on. Remember, it's a theory, not a proven fact. The argument is that Islam and the West are fundamentally incompatible because their values are just too different.
Too different. Yeah, but is it really that simple?
I mean,
You know.
our source really pushes us to think critically here.
Okay.
For example, it mentions the greater jihad, an inner spiritual struggle that Prophet Muhammad himself taught.
Right.
This directly contradicts the image of Islam as inherently violent or expansionist.
It's a perfect example of why simplifying complex issues can be so dangerous.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the massive influence Islam has had on Western, particularly European art and culture.
Oh, yeah. Think about Moorish architecture in Spain, the incredible scientific advancements of the Islamic Golden Age, or the philosophical exchanges that fueled the Renaissance.
So much richness.
These historical realities make any simplistic clash narrative seem pretty flimsy, don't you think?
Yeah, it's all about seeing the nuances,
Yeah.
the shared history, and the potential for dialogue,
Yeah.
rather than accepting this clash as inevitable.
Right.
It's that kind of analysis that gets you those high marks on the mains.
It really does. Which brings us to the second perspective, Islam, especially the Arab world, as a victim of Western intervention and manipulation.
Okay.
That's where we'll pick up after a quick break.
Sounds good. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives that'll help you ace those UPSC exams.
Definitely do that. It's a point that often gets overlooked, you know? But it's vital for understanding the complexities of this whole relationship.
Yeah.
It's about moving beyond those simplistic narratives and really examining the power dynamics that have shaped history.
You're absolutely right. I mean, think about it. We're talking about centuries of colonialism.
Yep.
The carving up of the Middle East after World War I, the Cold War playing out on Arab soil, and then those more recent interventions in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya.
Exact.
Those events have left a lasting impact on the Muslim world.
They really have. And it's not just about past grievances, you know?
Right.
We need to look at contemporary issues as well.
Like what?
Well, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for
Sure.
one,
Right.
Western support for authoritarian regimes, the economic exploitation of resources,
You're right.
these all feed into this feeling that the West isn't just this neutral observer, you know?
Right.
It's actively shaping the destinies of Muslim nations.
And that brings us to this concept of Islamophobia, which has unfortunately become more and more prevalent in Western societies.
Yeah.
Discrimination, prejudice, even violence directed at Muslims
Yeah.
simply because of their faith.
It's awful.
It creates this climate of fear and mistrust, making it even harder to bridge those divides.
It really does. It's a serious issue and something UPSC aspirants should be aware of. How does Islamophobia affect international relations? How does it influence domestic policies in Western countries?
Yeah, these are important questions to consider.
They really are.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's often intertwined with these discussions of Islam in the West. The concept of an Islamic state.
Okay.
This is something our source material dives into, and it's particularly relevant for UPSC aspirants.
Right. Remember, we're talking about a state where Sharia law derived from the Quran and the Sunnah forms the basis of governance.
Exactly.
It's a concept that has real-world implications, and you need to be prepared to discuss it intelligently.
We're not just talking theory here. Think of Iran, which declared itself an Islamic republic in 1979,
Right.
or the Taliban's rule in Afghanistan.
Yeah, they both implemented their interpretations of Sharia law.
And those examples highlight the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all model of an Islamic state.
Exactly. The interpretation and implementation of Sharia law can vary significantly.
And this is where things can get tricky, especially for those unfamiliar with Islamic jurisprudence.
Oh, yeah.
Some aspects of Sharia law, as interpreted by certain groups, have been criticized for their perceived incompatibility with modern human rights norms.
That's a big one.
That's something you might want to delve deeper into.
Absolutely. For example, the issue of punishments for certain crimes,
Right.
like adultery or theft, often sparks heated debate.
I can imagine.
Some interpretations of Sharia law prescribe punishments that many in the West consider harsh or even inhumane.
Right.
It's important to understand the different perspectives on this.
It's all about nuance, right?
Yeah.
We need to avoid those sweeping generalizations.
We do.
It's about understanding the historical context, the different schools of Islamic legal thought, and the ongoing debates within the Muslim world itself about the interpretation and application of Sharia law.
Exactly. UPSC examiners are looking for that kind of nuanced understanding. You need to be able to explain the complexities of Sharia law and discuss its various interpretations.
Now, another topic that often comes up in discussions of Islam and the West is, of course, terrorism.
Yeah, big one.
While our source material focuses on political Islam, it's impossible to ignore the impact that groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS have had in shaping global perceptions.
Right. These groups have exploited religious rhetoric to justify their acts of violence, and that's had a profound impact on the clash of civilizations narrative.
It's crucial to remember that terrorism is a complex issue with roots in a variety of factors, political, economic, social, and sometimes ideological.
All of the above.
Attributing it solely to Islam is not only inaccurate, but also dangerous.
Absolutely. It feeds into prejudice and Islamophobia, which can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For UPSC aspirants, understanding the complexities of terrorism is key. You might be asked to analyze the root causes of terrorism, evaluate counterterrorism strategies, or assess the impact of terrorism on international relations and global security.
Good points.
Now, bringing it back to India's specific context, we have a unique perspective on this global discourse, especially considering our large Muslim population.
We do.
How does India balance its relationships with Muslim-majority nations, its stance on terrorism, and its approach to regional conflicts in the Middle East?
That's a question you should definitely be prepared to tackle. India's foreign policy has to navigate this delicate balance. We have strong relationships with many Muslim-majority nations. We're a vocal advocate for interfaith dialogue, but we've also been a victim of terrorism perpetrated by groups claiming to act in the name of Islam.
It's a challenging situation, and there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But it's exactly the kind of situation that UPSC examiners want to see you grapple with.
Yeah.
You need to demonstrate that you can apply your knowledge to real-world scenarios.
Now, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's pause for a moment to recap some of the key takeaways.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our exploration of Islam and the West. We've covered a lot of ground from, the core tenets of Islam to the emergence of political Islam,
Right.
the concept of an Islamic state, and even touched upon this pox issue of terrorism.
Yeah.
One thing that really stood out to me is just how crucial it is to understand the historical context,
Oh, for sure.
especially for you UPSC aspirants out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest takeaways from our discussion is that you just can't analyze this relationship between Islam and the West
Right,
without
yeah.
considering that long history of interaction and, often conflict.
Exactly. And that historical context is especially important when considering this idea of Islam as a victim of Western intervention.
For sure.
We can't ignore the impact of colonialism,
Right.
those Cold War rivalries that often played out on Arab soil, and then more recent interventions in the Middle East.
Yeah, and those events have left this really deep mark on the Muslim world,
Yeah.
fueling resentment and mistrust.
For sure. And it's not just about past grievances either.
No, not at all.
Think about the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for example, or the way economic policies and trade agreements are often perceived
Yeah,
as benefiting Western nations at the expense of Muslim-majority countries.
definitely. And we also have to acknowledge the issue of Islamophobia, which has become a serious problem in many Western societies.
Right.
Discrimination, prejudice, even violence directed at Muslims creates this climate of fear and mistrust that makes it even harder to bridge these divides.
So where does this leave us? Is the relationship between Islam and the West doomed to perpetual conflict? Or is there hope for constructive dialogue and cooperation? I feel like this is a question UPSC examiners love to throw at you,
They do.
but there's no easy answer, is there?
Not at all. But I think understanding the historical context,
Yeah.
recognizing the grievances and the power dynamics at play, and acknowledging the impact of things like Islamophobia are all essential first steps.
It's about moving beyond those simplistic narratives and stereotypes and engaging in a genuine effort to understand the other side's perspective.
It really is. And for you UPSC aspirants, that means developing the ability to analyze these complex situations,
Right.
weigh different viewpoints, and formulate your own informed opinion.
That's what it's all about.
Remember, the UPSC isn't just looking for people who can memorize facts.
No, yeah.
They're looking for critical thinkers, future leaders who can navigate the nuances of a globalized world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's what we've aimed to do in this deep dive.
We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully this has given you some food for thought,
Yeah.
a deeper understanding of this complex relationship between Islam and the West. And hey, if you found this deep dive helpful,
Yeah.
don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow UPSC aspirants.
Absolutely. Spread the knowledge.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning,
Yeah.
and keep exploring the world around you.
We'll see you then.